A Miss Marple Mystery, Chapter 1. The Misty Mountain Lodge was not truly atop a mountain, nor was it particularly misty on most days. A genteel establishment on the slopes above the village of Lidmere, it prided itself on its neat lawns, its distant views of the hills, and the certainty of being just removed enough from the world for people to speak a little more freely than they ought. On this particular Thursday, the drawing-room was arranged for afternoon tea. A fire snapped quietly in the hearth, despite the mildness of the July air. Appearances mattered at Misty Mountain Lodge. In attendance were the sorts of people who considered themselves too refined to gossip, but managed it all the same under the guise of polite conversation. Miss Marple, settled discreetly in a corner with her knitting and a plate of seed cake, might have been easily overlooked. She preferred it that way. Her sharp eyes took in the scene. Lady Weatherford in her perennial lilac, her rings heavy and her opinions heavier. Colonel Prowther, all moustache and military anecdote. Young Mrs. Diana Hargrove, newly widowed, nerves tight as piano wire beneath her fashionable veneer. And others besides, Mr. Ellaby with his too careful words, Miss Felicity Manners, all wide eyes and false innocence, Reverend Good, who disapproved of everything except his own sermons. Their hostess, Mrs. Biddlecombe, fluttered from guest to guest, pouring tea, complimenting hats, steering conversations. One must always encourage community spirit, she had said earlier, though Miss Marple suspected Mrs. Biddlecombe simply disliked solitude. As cups clinked and laughter murmured like a stream over stones, something else hung in the air, a tension beneath the civility. Miss Marple, adept in the ways of village life, knew the signs, glances that didn't quite meet, laughter pitched just a fraction too high, the tiniest of hesitations before answering simple questions. Someone here was keeping a secret, or several people were. That, of course, was nothing unusual. What struck her was how expectant it all seemed, as though something inevitable loomed just out of sight. Lady Weatherford set down her cup with unnecessary force. Terrible business, that poor man in Eastbourne last week. Found dead in his garden, you know. Such things simply didn't happen when I was a girl. Mrs. Hargrove's spoon paused midway to her saucer. Oh, but they did, Lady Weatherford. People simply pretended they didn't. Colonel Prowther harumphed. Beastly habit of bringing up unpleasantness at tea, Weatherford. Damned unsporting. The conversation wandered into safer waters. The rhododendrons, the state of the railway timetables, the curious chill in the evenings despite the calendar claiming summer. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking softly. Beneath the small talk, small truths revealed themselves. Who disliked whom? Who watched whom too closely? Whose smiles faltered when they thought no one noticed? Mrs. Biddlecombe called for another round of scones, declared the jam inferior this year, and chattered brightly about the upcoming charity fete. So important for village morale. Don't you agree, Miss Marple? Oh, yes, said Miss Marple mildly, though I often think the greatest service to village morale is the careful keeping of one's own counsel. There was a flicker then, barely perceptible, a glance exchanged between Mr. Ellaby and Mrs. Hargrove. Too brief for most to catch, too telling for Miss Marple to miss. As the tea wound on and chairs were pushed back with polite gratitude, the guests departed in drifts, some to rooms, some to appointments, some to secret assignations, if Miss Marple's instincts were correct, and they usually were. Out on the terrace, the sky had clouded over. Hills faded into grey. The air pressed close, as though holding its breath. "Storm coming," said Colonel Prouder to no one in particular. "Yes," murmured Miss Marple. "I rather think it is." She turned back inside, her knitting folded neatly in her lap. Somewhere between the first pour of tea and the last crumb of cake, she had caught the scent of trouble, and she would not have to wait long. Tomorrow, someone at Misty Mountain Lodge would be dead. Chapter 2. By morning, the promised storm had broken. Rain lashed the neat panes of Misty Mountain Lodge, and the wind made a soft, persistent moaning in the eaves. Breakfast was a muted affair. The usual pleasantries were exchanged, but voices seemed oddly hushed, as though the weather had pressed down upon them all. Miss Marple arrived late, a small figure wrapped in a sensible grey cardigan, and took her customary seat near the window. She accepted her kippers with a polite nod, but listened more closely to the conversation around her than she did to the rattle of her cutlery. Lady Weatherford was absent, a fact noted, if not remarked upon. Colonel Prouder's moustache bristled over his teacup. Beastly night. Thought the blasted chimney might come down on my head. Reverend Good peered mournfully at his eggs. Storms are nature's way of reminding us of our insignificance, Colonel. Mrs. Biddlecombe bustled between tables, offering reassurance that the weather would soon pass and the roads were still perfectly safe for motor travel, should anyone have urgent plans. No one did. Mrs. Hargrove, pale beneath her rouge, toyed with a slice of toast. "I always think rain makes everything seem heavier somehow, as though it presses secrets to the surface." Mr. Ellaby, seated opposite, gave her a glance both quick and sharp. Best keep secrets where they belong, under lock and key. The remark hung oddly in the air. Miss Marple watched how Mrs. Hargrove's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her tea. Small things spoke volumes. After breakfast, guests dispersed in the aimless manner of those trapped indoors, by weather and polite obligation. Miss Marple, with her knitting bag and an air of quiet purpose, made her way to the sitting-room, where the day's post had been delivered to a small table beneath the clock. She had no letters herself. She seldom did these days, but observed with interest that Mrs. Biddlecombe collected a single envelope with faint haste, before retreating towards the morning room. Elsewhere, muted voices threaded through corridors. Not quarrels, too carefully modulated for that, but the low, urgent exchanges of people with matters they wished to keep unseen. Miss Marple passed the library and caught a fragment of Miss Felicity Manners's tones, unusually sharp. "Said I wouldn't, and I shan't. You've no right to ask it of me." Silence followed. Then the door clicked softly shut. Miss Marple made no comment. The rain drummed on, and the grandfather clock in the hall marked time with an implacable tick. It was just before 11 when the housemaid, a nervous girl named Ida, came stumbling breathless into the lounge, where Miss Marple sat knitting. Her face was pale beneath her cap, her hands clutching at her apron. "Ma'am, Mrs. Biddlecombe." Miss Marple rose at once. "What is it, child?" "In the morning room. She's..." The girl's throat worked around the word. "She's not waking up." In the sudden hush, even the rain seemed to pause. They found Mrs. Biddlecombe slumped in her chair by the fire, her teacup fallen sideways on the carpet. A gentlewoman's end, if such a thing existed, alone in a room of polished surfaces and discreet floral arrangements. Yet even Miss Marple, who had seen more than her share of such scenes, noted something disquieting in the tableau. It wasn't simply that Mrs. Biddlecombe was dead. It was the neatness of it, the absence of struggle, the faint trace of something calculated. Colonel Prouder was summoned, as was Reverend Good, both men falling back on instinctive roles, the Colonel for order, the Reverend for appearances of concern. The housemaid sobbed quietly in the hall. It was Mr. Ellaby who suggested the doctor. Routine, of course, but one must be certain. The doctor came, brisk and smelling faintly of carbolic. His verdict was soft but firm. Heart, I should think. Nothing unusual. These things happen. Colonel Prouder nodded. Damn shame. Fine woman. Kept a fine house. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the spilled tea. She thought of the envelope, hurriedly pocketed, of Mrs. Hargrove's pale fingers, and Mr. Ellaby's watchful glance, of Miss Manners's angry whisper behind the library door. Heart failure, perhaps. But Miss Marple, who understood the delicate balances upon which village life so often rested, thought it more likely that someone had given fate a helping hand. She said nothing aloud. Not yet. But she continued to knit, and she continued to watch. And when Mrs. Biddlecombe's body was carried out, beneath the grey weight of the sky, Miss Marple thought, yes, this was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The rain had eased by the afternoon, but the clouds hung low, as though reluctant to release the house from their grasp. News of Mrs. Biddlecombe's death spread quickly through the lodge, carried not by announcement, but by the peculiar hush that follows tragedy. The kind of hush that makes footsteps softer, voices quieter, glances more furtive. Miss Marple sat in the lounge with her knitting untouched on her lap, her attention fixed not on yarn, but on people. Already lines were being drawn, positions quietly staked. Grief had little to do with it. The living thought chiefly of themselves. Lady Weatherford had emerged at last, swathed in black as though summoned from some private tragedy. Poor dear Biddlecombe, a great loss, quite sudden, you say. But of course these things so often are. Colonel Prouder's expression remained fixed in what he perhaps believed to be a mask of stoic British dignity. Nothing to be done. The doctor was clear-hearted. But Miss Marple noticed how his gaze kept flicking towards the morning-room door, as if expecting something or someone to emerge with further complications. Mr. Ellaby appeared more composed than might be expected, given the circumstances. He offered his condolences with suitable gravity, yet there was a peculiar tension to his mouth, as though holding something unsaid tightly between his teeth. Mrs. Hargrove said little. She had retreated to the conservatory and stood now among the ghostly shapes of ferns and potted palms, her hands pressed flat against the glass, as though seeking escape through the storm-dampened world beyond. It was Miss Felicity Manners who finally broke the fragile quiet. Approaching Miss Marple with a nervous energy ill-disguised by her attempt at lightness. "Awful business, isn't it? One simply doesn't expect. Well, not at a place like this." Miss Marple looked up with her mildest smile. "Death rarely troubles itself with the suitability of a setting, my dear." Felicity gave a shaky laugh. "No, I suppose not. Still, it does make one wonder, doesn't it? All that talk at breakfast about secrets, rather eerie in retrospect. Secrets are not uncommon in small communities. No, but one doesn't expect them to end in, well, corpses. Miss Marple resumed her knitting. One ought never to underestimate the lengths people will go to protect what they feel must be kept hidden. Felicity's fingers twisted at the clasp of her handbag. It wasn't, you don't think, surely it really was natural causes. Miss Marple gave a soft, non-committal hum. So the doctor says. But you think otherwise. My dear child, I very seldom think anything until I am quite certain of it. Observation, you know, must always come before deduction. Felicity coloured faintly and offered a hasty excuse to retreat. Miss Marple watched her go with thoughtful eyes. A young woman in some trouble, perhaps. Not guilty of murder, necessarily, but tangled in something nonetheless. Outside, Reverend Good crossed the terrace with slow, deliberate steps, pausing to exchange a few solemn words with Colonel Prouthar. Whatever passed between them left the Colonel frowning deeper than before. By supper, the house had resumed a semblance of routine. The guests gathered in subdued clutches, conversation carefully steered towards neutral ground. Recipes, gardens, books no one had read. The avoidance of unpleasantness was an English art form. Miss Marple, seated beside Lady Weatherford, noted the absence of Mrs. Hargrove. "Ill with nerves," said the maid, resting with a headache. Such headaches were often convenient. "Sad business," Lady Weatherford murmured over her consommé. "Still, one mustn't dwell. Life goes on, doesn't it?" "For most of us, yes," Miss Marple said. Later, in the shadowed quiet of the hall, she passed by Mr. Ellerby, engaged in a low conversation with the housekeeper. His words were indistinct, but his tone bore the weight of urgency wrapped in civility. The housekeeper's face remained blank, save for a brief flicker of something wary. Miss Marple paused at the writing desk, made a small show of sorting through stationery she did not intend to use. From the corner of her eye, she watched Ellerby retreat upstairs. His step, she thought, was too careful for a man merely concerned with schedules and accommodation. Behind her, the grandfather clock struck 8. A respectable hour for retiring, though she suspected few would sleep soundly tonight. Miss Marple did not believe in accidents, nor did she believe in convenient deaths that arrived precisely when certain secrets seemed poised to surface. Tomorrow, she thought, would bring answers, or at least the chance to ask the right questions. For now, she gathered her knitting, her shawl, and her suspicions, and made her way to bed. Chapter 4. Morning returned to Misty Mountain Lodge with deceptive calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean stillness that settled uneasily over the house. The staff moved quietly through their duties, eyes downcast, voices muted. Guests lingered longer over their breakfasts, reluctant to meet the day's obligations, such as they were. Miss Marple took her tea and toast in the lounge, her knitting laid aside in favour of the day's newspaper, though she turned no pages and read no headlines. Her attention remained on the ebb and flow of people through the corridors, on the tones of voices exchanged just beyond her sight. Mrs. Hargrove appeared mid-morning, drawn and pale, her smile brittle as spun sugar. She avoided Miss Marple's gaze, but offered polite greetings to others with the strained precision of a woman rehearsing normality. Colonel Prouthar gave her a stiff nod. Mr. Ellerby did not look up from his correspondence. Felicity Manners hovered near the dish window, pretending an interest in the view. Reverend Good paced the terrace with his usual air of solemn preoccupation, pausing now and then to glance back at the house, as though suspecting it of harboring ungodly secrets. At 11, the police arrived, not with sirens or bluster, but with quiet authority. Inspector Crome was a man of medium height and moderate opinions, inclined to caution rather than dramatics. His manner suggested he did not relish interrupting genteel routines, but understood it to be necessary. "We'll need to speak to everyone, of course," he told the assembled guests with a respectful nod. "Purely routine. No need for concern." Concern, Miss Marple reflected, was already well in residence. One by one, the guests were taken aside for brief polite interviews. Miss Marple's own turn passed without difficulty. She answered in soft, unhurried tones, offering little beyond what was known. Mrs. Biddlecombe had seemed her usual self until she wasn't. A sudden death, pronounced natural, though of course suddenness and nature were not always easy companions. Inspector Crome asked if she had noticed anything unusual. Miss Marple considered. Only the ordinary tensions of a small society drawn too close together. People reveal rather more of themselves than they intend under such circumstances. The inspector gave a non-committal hum. "No strangers about that you noticed?" "Strangers seldom enter where they feel uninvited. The danger, I've found, usually lies among the familiar." He made a small note and thanked her. It was after luncheon, as Miss Marple wandered through the house under the pretence of stretching her legs, that she found herself again outside the morning-room. The door stood ajar. No one seemed to notice as she slipped quietly inside. The room remained untouched since the doctor's verdict and Mrs. Biddlecombe's quiet removal. A faint trace of lavender hung beneath the heavier scent of extinguished fire and stale tea. Miss Marple's gaze moved without haste. The chair, the fallen cup, the neat little table where Mrs. Biddlecombe had taken her letters. There, half hidden beneath a housekeeping ledger, lay the envelope she had seen the woman take the day before. Forgotten, overlooked in the small chaos of death. It bore no stamp, no postmark, a hand-delivered note then, the writing precise, faintly old-fashioned, to be opened alone. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the edge of the paper. Tempting, of course, but she had no wish to interfere openly. Instead, she noted the heavy quality of the paper, the faint indentation where something sharp had pressed beneath the signature. A signet ring, perhaps, or the tremor of a hand unused to writing threads. She left it untouched, but its presence told her what she needed to know. Someone within these walls had communicated with Mrs. Biddlecombe shortly before her death. Someone who had wished discretion, and perhaps secrecy. Outside in the hall, footsteps approached. Colonel Prowther, his habitual scowl deeper than usual. He paused upon seeing her. "Ah, Miss Marple, not distressing yourself over yesterday's business, I hope?" "Oh, no, Colonel. Merely stretching my legs." He nodded, distracted. "Damnable thing. Always these sudden deaths, isn't it? Makes one think. As if a man didn't have enough to think about these days." "Quite." He moved on, boots thudding against the polished floor. Miss Marple watched him go, her thoughts knitting themselves together with more speed than her fingers ever could. Secrets, yes. Messages delivered by hand. A household unsettled by more than mere tragedy. There was, she felt certain, more to uncover, and she would uncover it, but quietly, patiently, one thread at a time. Chapter 5. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. The guests remained, though no one said precisely why. Perhaps politeness, perhaps curiosity, or perhaps it was the sense, thickening like fog, that no one ought to leave until something was resolved. Inspector Crome lingered as well. Officially, his inquiries were concluded. Unofficially, his presence hung like a quiet shadow over breakfasts, luncheons, and the awkward rituals of afternoon tea. Miss Marple observed this with the calm patience of one who had seen village dramas unfold 100 times before. The pattern rarely changed, suspicion knitting itself between acquaintances like fine silk, loyalties shifting beneath polite conversation, and those with secrets becoming clumsy in their attempts to seem blameless. It was during a grey afternoon, while others huddled over newspapers or cards, that Miss Marple found herself once again in quiet conversation with Felicity Manners. The younger woman had the restless air of someone afraid of silence. "I don't know why I'm still here," Felicity said suddenly. "It's horrid, really, staying in a house where someone's died." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly. "People stay for all sorts of reasons, my dear. Curiosity is often among them." Felicity flushed. "Not curiosity, not exactly." "No. Then what?" The young woman hesitated. "It's silly, but I promised someone I wouldn't leave. Not just yet." "Someone here?" A pause. "I'd rather not say." Miss Marple gave her a gentle smile. "Very wise. Words spoken too freely often cause more trouble than they prevent." Felicity looked relieved. "Yes, exactly that." Elsewhere in the lounge, Mr. Ellaby and Colonel Prouthar engaged in a game of chess conducted with the heavy silence of men determined not to speak more than necessary. Both looked up, however, when Reverend Good entered with an expression of faintly theatrical concern. "I say, has anyone seen Mrs. Hargrove?" Colonel Prouthar grunted. "Gone to her room, hasn't she? Nerves or some such?" No. I've just come from there." No answer to my knock. Ellaby's eyes sharpened. "Perhaps she's resting." "She's not in the house," Reverend Good said, a touch too quickly. "I saw from the terrace. She's walking towards the woods." "A foolish thing to do alone, after all this," muttered Prouthar. Miss Marple folded her knitting with deliberate care. "Then perhaps someone should fetch her back." In the end, it was Mr. Ellaby who volunteered, though not before exchanging a glance with Felicity that Miss Marple did not miss. Connections everywhere, she thought, though none yet plainly drawn. The woods yielded Mrs. Hargrove after an hour. She returned pale, damp about the hems, her gloves clutched in a hand that trembled slightly. To questions she gave vague answers. Air. She needed air. The house felt oppressive. No, she had not intended to cause alarm. That evening, Inspector Crome called on Miss Marple under the polite pretext of sharing tea. His manner was easy, but Miss Marple noted the faint crease between his brows. "You don't think this business quite as straightforward as the doctor did?" she observed, after pouring. He smiled faintly. "No harm in a second opinion, Miss Marple. Quiet places often breed complicated answers. Indeed, and people rarely die at the most convenient time, unless someone sees to it." He accepted his tea. "You noticed something?" "A great many things, Inspector. Not all of them connected yet. Such as the letter Mrs. Biddlecombe received. hand-delivered shortly before her death. His gaze sharpened. "You saw it?" "I saw enough. It suggested privacy, secrecy. It suggested fear." "And you think that note led to her death?" "I think it led to something. Perhaps fear hastened her heart, or perhaps it hastened someone else's hand. Either way, it is not irrelevant." Inspector Crome set down his cup. "Thank you, Miss Marple. You've given me something worth pursuing." As he left, Miss Marple watched the dark creep softly against the windows. Somewhere within these walls, the truth waited. A woman dead, a letter unread, secrets stitched into conversations, glances, silences. It would unravel soon. They always did. Chapter 6. The following morning dawned cold and sharp. The rain swept away to reveal a brittle blue sky above the hills. Yet within Misty Mountain Lodge, the atmosphere remained close, heavy with things unsaid. Miss Marple noted the subdued tones at breakfast, the careful glances exchanged between guests who had, until recently, been strangers bound only by shared geography and weak tea. Now they shared suspicion, though none dared name it aloud. Mrs. Hargrove appeared later than usual, her pallor no longer fashionable but sickly. She avoided company, claiming a headache, and retired almost immediately to the conservatory, where she sat among the drooping ferns, staring out at nothing. Colonel Prouder kept to the papers, grumbling faintly over matters of government and the collapse of standards. Felicity Manners flitted between rooms, too restless to sit, too anxious to appear idle. Mr. Ellaby remained elusive, slipping away on vague errands and returning without explanation. Reverend Good lingered at windows, watching clouds as though awaiting divine instruction. Miss Marple took it all in with her usual serenity. These little movements, these small retreats and sudden interests, they told her far more than any statement could. People under strain seldom acted as they intended. Inspector Crome returned mid-morning. His manner was still courteous, but Miss Marple noted the thinning patience beneath it. He had questions, and he did not appreciate obfuscation. He called each guest aside once more, this time with less pretense of casual interest. Miss Marple's turn came last. "You've been observing, Miss Marple. I wonder if you've formed any conclusions." "Oh no, Inspector. Not conclusions, but I've gathered threads, and threads, as you know, have a way of leading somewhere eventually." He gave a tight smile. "Any particular thread you think I ought to tug first?" "Mrs. Hargrove's walk in the woods. I think it was not the first she's taken, nor was it for air." "You believe she met someone?" "I believe she fears something, or someone." Inspector Crome made a note. "Anything else?" "The envelope, of course. The one addressed so privately to Mrs. Biddlecombe. I wonder if Mrs. Hargrove knows more of it than she's said." "Ellaby mentioned nothing of it." "Number Mr. Ellaby strikes me as a man who knows precisely what to mention and what to keep back." The inspector sighed. "You make this sound a tangled business, Miss Marple." "It is, Inspector. Murder always tangles things. That's its nature." Later that day, a quiet incident disturbed the false calm. A maid, sent to air out Mrs. Biddlecombe's vacated rooms, let slip that something had gone missing. A small jewelry box from the writing desk, one Mrs. Biddlecombe had been seen locking away only days before. No valuables remained. The box itself had vanished. Colonel Prouder scoffed at the fuss. "Thieves, then. That's your answer, Crome. House full of strangers. Someone saw a chance. But Miss Marple saw the tightening of Mr. Ellaby's jaw, the way Felicity's hands fluttered at her throat. Mrs. Hargrove said nothing at all. That evening the atmosphere frayed further. Conversation dried up altogether. People moved as though wary of their own shadows. Inspector Crome watched it all, silent, calculating. It was not until near midnight that the next disturbance came. A crash, a sharp cry, and footsteps pounding through the hall. Felicity Manners, pale as the moonlight spilling through the high windows, stood outside the library, her hand pressed to her mouth. I thought I heard someone," she stammered. "I came down just for a book, and then—" Inside, the room was empty. Or nearly. A window hung open to the night. A curtain flapped like something alive. On the desk lay a torn scrap of paper, half-burned, words blurred but still legible in parts. "Cannot be found out. If you speak, it will ruin us both." Inspector Crome gathered it with care. "Miss Manners, who were you meeting here?" "No one," she said too quickly. "I swear, I thought I was alone." Miss Marple, watching from the doorway, said nothing. But her eyes were very sharp. Threads, she thought again, frayed at the edges, leading somewhere, and soon she would know precisely where. Chapter 7. Morning at Misty Mountain Lodge brought little improvement in spirits. Sleep had been scarce, and the night's disturbance still hung in the air like smoke. Even the staff moved with subdued wariness, casting glances over their shoulders at listeners as though expecting some shadow to materialize behind them. Inspector Crome looked weary, but more determined than ever. After breakfast, he spoke with Felicity Manners again, this time without the soft politeness of earlier days. "You were meeting someone," he said. "No young woman wanders about at midnight without cause." "I told you," Felicity replied, twisting a handkerchief in her lap. "I went for a book. I heard something. I thought someone might be hurt." Crome's gaze remained steady. "And the note? The window? The torn paper doesn't write itself." "I don't know." Her composure frayed further. "I didn't write it. I didn't even see it until you showed me." Inspector Crome left the matter with a curt nod, but made a note to have Miss Manners's belongings examined. Miss Marple, who had observed this exchange from her armchair by the hearth, said nothing. Her mind was on Mrs. Hargrove, who had taken to her room and refused to appear. "Illness again," said the maid, "a nervous complaint." The maid's voice had trembled. Mid-morning brought another small ripple of interest. The housemaid Ida, still pale from the discovery of Mrs. Biddlecombe's body, approached Miss Marple with hesitant steps. "Begging pardon, ma'am, but was it you who moved the little box from the writing desk?" "No, my dear. I thought perhaps someone had told you to. Only it's back now." "Back?" Ida nodded, eyes wide. "In the drawer, neat as you please, after it went missing." Miss Marple thanked her with gentle reassurance. Alone again, she considered this. Not theft, then. Not theft in the ordinary sense. Something had been taken and returned, or hidden and replaced. Either way, it spoke of fear. Fear not of loss, but of discovery. Later, while others kept to their strained occupations, Miss Marple wandered once more to the morning room. It was empty. Sunlight filtered weakly through rain-dulled glass. She moved quietly without hurry, her fingers tracing the edge of the desk where the box had been. The box itself was plain, locked again, its purpose unclear. Not valuables. Mrs. Biddlecombe had kept her jewels elsewhere. Letters, perhaps, or documents best not left to idle eyes. Miss Marple's gaze fell to the waste-paper basket beneath the writing table. Within, among scraps of paper and a torn page of the Times, lay a corner of blue notepaper. Smooth, heavy, familiar. She retrieved it delicately. The handwriting matched the envelope she had seen. A single line remained, jagged where it had been ripped away from the rest. Can no longer protect you if you persist. She replaced it carefully and left the room as she had found it. Inspector Crome met her in the hall. His expression had grown sharper, less inclined to courtesy. "You're not the sort to wander without purpose, Miss Marple. No one is, Inspector, not truly." He fell into step beside her. "You think this is about more than Mrs. Biddlecombe's heart. I think someone here is very afraid, and fear often leads to foolishness. Or worse." Crome's glance was grim. "Secrets? Blackmail? Very likely," he considered. "Mrs. Hargrove? She is not the only one with something to hide." The afternoon passed slowly, under a sky thick with threat. Tea was taken in silence, cups lifted and set down without comment. Mrs. Hargrove did not appear, neither did Felicity, who pleaded a headache. Ellaby remained, steadfast at his chess with Colonel Prouder, though neither seemed to pay the game much attention. "I hate waiting," muttered the Colonel at last. "Give me a battlefield over this any day." Ellaby smiled faintly. "We're all on a battlefield now, Colonel. Only the weapons are different." Miss Marple caught the exchange, filed it away. Words often slipped where actions were guarded. Evening crept in on quiet feet. Miss Marple retired early, her knitting abandoned in favor of thought. The threads tightened around the lodge, drawing its inhabitants closer to whatever truth lay at the center. And soon she felt someone's fear would snap. Chapter 8. Morning brought no confession, no revelation, only a deepening of the silence that had settled like dust upon Misty Mountain Lodge. Even the staff moved more quietly now, as though fearful of disturbing something they could not name. Miss Marple sat through breakfast with her usual patience. Mrs. Hargrove remained absent. Felicity Manners appeared, pale but composed, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the room. Colonel Prouder grumbled into his eggs, while Mr. Ellaby read his newspaper with ostentatious calm. Inspector Crome watched them all. His expression had settled into something unreadable. Afterwards, Miss Marple took herself to the conservatory, where she found Mrs. Hargrove seated among the ferns once more, as if rooted there by grief or guilt or both. "Good morning, Mrs. Hargrove," Miss Marple said, as though it were any ordinary day. The other woman started. "Oh, yes, good morning." Miss Marple settled into a wicker chair. "You've not been yourself lately." Mrs. Hargrove's fingers twisted in her lap. "I haven't felt quite well. Everything's been so difficult. Death unsettles us all, especially when it arrives unexpectedly." There was a pause. Then it wasn't unexpected. Miss Marple's knitting paused mid-stitch. "Oh," Mrs. Hargrove bit her lip. "She was afraid, you know. Mrs. Biddlecombe. She said things had been hinted, threatened. She didn't say who, but she was frightened. And yet she stayed here. She thought, perhaps wrongly, that she could manage it. And the letter?" Mrs. Hargrove's breath caught. "I don't know anything about a letter." Miss Marple resumed her knitting. "No, but something was returned to her room after her death. Something hidden. A silence stretched between them. "I didn't mean harm," Mrs. Hargrove said at last, very low. "I only thought to protect her, or myself. I didn't want to be involved." "You are involved, my dear, as we all are now." Mrs. Hargrove's shoulders sagged. "I didn't write the letter. I don't even know what it said, only that she seemed more herself after reading it, calmer, as if a decision had been made. And yet she died." "Yes." Miss Marple gave her a kind look. "Secrets have a way of curdling, Mrs. Hargrove. Best not let them fester too long." The woman said nothing more. Later, Inspector Crome found Miss Marple in the lounge. "You're speaking with everyone, I notice." "One learns more that way than from official interviews, Inspector." "You've learned something." "Only that fear clouds the truth, and fear is running rampant here." He nodded grimly. "I had a look through Ellaby's things this morning. Nothing of interest. No letters, no papers, no indication he's involved in anything. Nothing hidden, perhaps. But involvement leaves traces beyond paper. That's not much to build a case on." "No, Inspector, but enough to build a question." In the afternoon, a development. One of the maids dusting in the library discovered an envelope pushed beneath the corner of a bookcase. Torn, empty, but bearing the same distinctive hand as the others. For her eyes alone, Inspector Crome called the guests together. His tone was sharper now. "This is no longer a question of accident or natural causes. Someone in this house has been playing a dangerous game. That stops now." Colonel Prouder barked a protest. "I've nothing to do with notes or letters." "No one's accusing you, yet." Ellaby gave a short, cold laugh. "You'll find nothing to accuse me of either, Inspector." "Then perhaps you'll explain what business took you outside last night." Ellaby's jaw tightened. "I take my walks where I please. I don't account for every step." But someone should. The group broke apart uneasily. Felicity vanished to her room. Mrs. Hargrove returned to the conservatory. Colonel Prouder stormed into the lounge with a glass of something dark and sullen. Miss Marple remained where she was, her knitting steady in her lap. The threads were tightening. Not long now. Fear would give way to desperation, and desperation, she knew, always led to truth. Chapter 9. The lodge seemed quieter than ever that evening. Even the grandfather clock ticked more cautiously, as though mindful of the atmosphere pressing in from every side. Inspector Crome prowled the corridors like a man hunting shadows. His patience, already thin, had worn near to breaking. Questions hung in the air unanswered. Lies clung to the walls like ivy. Someone, somewhere, was losing their grip. Miss Marple moved with her customary calm, noting the signs others missed. The sudden silences when she entered a room, the way conversations bent themselves around her presence. Fear frayed the edges of propriety. Soon it would unravel entirely. In the drawing-room, Colonel Prouder sat with a drink in hand, his scowl fixed deep enough to carve. "Whole place gone to rot," he muttered. "Letters and nonsense, and women jumping at shadows." "No doubt unsettling for a man of action," Miss Marple observed, settling herself nearby with her knitting. "Not action, ma'am. Clarity. A battlefield has rules. This is all whispers and sneaking about. And yet, Colonel, whispers often achieve what armies cannot." He grunted, but said no more. Later, in the dim corridor beyond the library, Miss Marple encountered Mr. Ellaby. His composure had begun to crack. The set of his mouth was strained, his eyes too watchful. Out for another stroll, Mr. Ellaby? He gave a tight smile. Fresh air does a man good, even under suspicion. Suspicion finds its own way in, air or no. He inclined his head. And what is it you suspect, Miss Marple? That secrets tend to tangle until someone cuts through them. And you intend to be the one holding the scissors? I find scissors unnecessary. Patience usually suffices. He laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Miss Marple watched him vanish into the shadows. Another thread pulled taut. It was near midnight when the second disturbance came. A cry, sharp, startled, cut through the silence. Doors opened, voices rose. They found Felicity Manners at the foot of the back stairs, breathless, one hand pressed to her chest. Someone, I thought. Inspector Crome arrived moments later, his face dark with frustration. Miss Manners, please. What is it this time? I was going to the kitchen. I thought everyone asleep. And then someone was there, in the passage. I saw them slip into the study. They didn't see me. The study door was locked. Forced open, it revealed nothing out of place. But on the writing desk lay a folded piece of paper, freshly written, the ink still damp. If you want this to end, meet me by the orchard gate at midnight. Alone. Inspector Crome read it twice. Desperate people make foolish mistakes. Miss Marple said nothing. Her gaze lingered on Felicity, on the fear tightening her mouth, on the way her eyes flicked too often toward the clock. When midnight came, Inspector Crome and his constable watched from the shadows near the orchard gate. Miss Marple waited nearby, unseen. Felicity arrived first, her steps hesitant. She stood beneath the bare branches, glancing left, then right. Then a second figure approached, carefully, cautiously, Mrs. Hargrove. No words passed between them at first. Then, very low, I told you not to write. Not again. I was frightened, Felicity whispered. I didn't know what else to do. You'll ruin us both. I don't care. I can't live with this hanging over me. Inspector Crome stepped forward then, his face grim in the moonlight. You've both said quite enough. Mrs. Hargrove drew herself up. This is none of your concern. On the contrary, a woman is dead. And from the sound of things, you both know more about it than you've said. Silence fell. Felicity's shoulders shook. Mrs. Hargrove's defiance frayed visibly. Miss Marple emerged then, soft-voiced. Secrets always seem larger at night, don't they? Neither woman spoke, but Miss Marple saw it, the defeat in Mrs. Hargrove's eyes, the terror in Felicity's. The truth hovered now, just beyond reach. Soon it would step fully into the light. Chapter 10. The orchard confrontation cast a long shadow over the following day. Though few details were made public, the hush in the corridors thickened, and the silence at breakfast was broken only by the clink of china and the occasional nervous throat being cleared. Inspector Crome spent the morning behind closed doors with Felicity Manners and Mrs. Hargrove. Their confessions, or partial ones, had complicated matters, not clarified them. Miss Marple took tea alone in the lounge, her knitting forgotten beside her. She was thinking, as she often did in such cases, not of what had been said, but of what hadn't. Felicity had admitted to sending one letter. She'd been desperate, she said, afraid Mrs. Biddlecombe would reveal something from the past that would ruin her. But she denied any knowledge of what that something was. She only said it would destroy lives. I thought if I begged her, she might stay silent. Mrs. Hargrove's explanation was equally evasive. She'd found the box while tidying after Mrs. Biddlecombe's death, panicked when she saw the letters inside, and hidden them to protect her family. Or herself. She wasn't quite clear which. But neither woman admitted to writing the note found near the library, or the one slipped under the bookcase, nor could either explain the burned scrap found in the fire grate. Someone else had written those, someone still playing a dangerous game. Miss Marple wandered the corridors later, her steps soft against the old rugs. Near the back stairs, she paused, glancing up toward the gallery above. A voice drifted down, low and clipped. "Mr. Ellerby's. You're not as clever as you think, Good." Reverend Good's reply was sharp. "And you're not as invisible. You forget. Some of us remember what happened in Weymouth." Miss Marple moved away before they noticed her. Weymouth, a location, a slip. The sort of reference people made when they assumed everyone else had forgotten. She sought out Inspector Crome in the library. "Weymouth," she said simply. He blinked. "Pardon?" "I believe Mr. Ellerby and Reverend Good share a history there, one that may not bear much light." He sat back. "I'll look into it." "And may I suggest," Miss Marple continued gently, "you check the lodge's chimney flue. There may be more than ashes left of the letters Mrs. Biddlecombe tried to destroy." Crome stared at her for a long moment. Then, with a half-smile that held no humour, he rose. "You do have a knack, Miss Marple." By late afternoon, the discovery was made. Inside the flue, behind the loose brick just above the fireplace in the morning room, they found a second charred fragment of paper, too scorched to read in full, but one phrase clear among the soot. Only one person knew: Cartwright. Miss Marple read the name aloud, quietly. "Not a name we've heard before." Crome frowned. "Doesn't match any guest or staff. Number, but a person tied to a truth, evidently. And someone feared that truth enough to destroy this message. Or tried to." The final thread, it seemed, had begun to unwind. That evening, Miss Marple took her place in the lounge as usual. Colonel Prouther read the papers. Mr. Ellerby played chess alone. Reverend Good sat by the fire, unmoving. Felicity remained in her room. Mrs. Hargrove did not appear at all, and Miss Marple, her needles clicking softly once more, felt the last pieces shift into place. It would not be long now. The murderer was close. Chapter 11. The storm had passed, but the lodge still seemed to hold its breath. With each day's revelations, the truth edged closer, shedding disguises in whispers and burnt paper scraps. Miss Marple rose earlier than usual that morning and requested only tea in her room. She needed quiet, not for rest, but for thought. The name on the charred note, Cartwright, had stuck in her mind like a thorn, not because she recognized it, but precisely because no one else had. It was strange, she reflected, how often the most important figures in a drama were the ones left unspoken. By mid-morning, the house had stirred. Inspector Crome gathered all the remaining guests, formally now, for final interviews. There was no more pretense. A crime had occurred, and they were all suspects until proven otherwise. Colonel Prouther fumed at the implication. "I'm not accustomed to being treated like a criminal." Crome was unsympathetic. People tend not to advertise the title colonel. Mr. Ellerby remained controlled, offering cool answers with no trace of guilt, but with no warmth either. Reverend Good gave vague, pious statements about conscience and the dangers of judgment. And when Miss Marple's turn came, she surprised the inspector by offering not answers, but a proposal. "I believe it's time, Inspector, to set a small stage." He studied her carefully. "A trap, you mean?" "A nudge," she said mildly. "People in fear often hold steady, but people who believe the danger has passed, they move, they reveal them. But people who believe the danger has passed, they move, they reveal themselves." Crome considered. "What do you suggest?" "A rumor that a surviving letter was found, one intact, one naming names." He nodded slowly. "And who do we leak that to?" "Colonel Prowther," Miss Marple said without hesitation. "He'll spread it in under half an hour, convinced he hasn't." An hour later, it was done. Over a casual remark during tea, Crome had mentioned it to the Colonel with a glance at the fireplace and a raised brow. The story began to move. By late afternoon, Miss Marple was back in the lounge, knitting once more. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, the guests were uneasy. Mrs. Hargrove had reappeared, visibly strained. Felicity sat close to the fire, her hands buried in her lap. Ellerby read, though he had turned the same page 4 times. Reverend Good paced. Then, just before sunset, Mr. Ellerby rose. Quietly, no announcement, no farewell. He left his book, his scarf, and slipped from the room. Miss Marple stood moments later. "If you'll excuse me, I believe I left my spectacles in the morning room." She found Ellerby near the stairs leading down to the cellar, where the lodge's old office papers were kept. "Looking for something?" she asked, her tone gentle. He turned too fast. "You startled me." "I do apologize, though I believe that's twice now I've done so." He drew himself up. "Is there something you wish to imply?" "Only that people rarely walk toward old storage rooms unless they're looking for something they wish others had forgotten." His smile was brittle. "And what would I be looking for?" "A letter, perhaps. One you didn't destroy in time. One that mentioned the name Cartwright." There was a pause. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know Cartwright was the man Mrs. Biddlecombe feared. I know he was connected to something that happened in Weymouth. And I believe you were part of it." Ellerby's eyes flicked toward the cellar door. "You have no proof?" "No," said Miss Marple calmly, "but I expect you left some. Men in a panic often do." Inspector Crome stepped into the hall behind them. "Shall we check together?" Ellerby's shoulders dropped. Not with defeat, but with calculation. "You'll never prove anything, not properly." "Let's find out," Crome said. And with that, the final act began. Chapter 12. The cellar beneath Misty Mountain Lodge had the musty stillness of a place long used, but rarely entered. Its stone floor bore the scuff of old boots and chair legs. Faded ledgers lined the shelves, and in the far corner a rusted furnace waited in silence, long retired. Inspector Crome moved with purpose, his torchlight cutting across boxes and cobwebs. Miss Marple followed without comment. Mr. Ellerby trailed behind, hands in his coat pockets, his expression carefully composed. "Just old paper," he muttered. "You won't find anything here." But they did. Inside a flat cardboard file marked "Insurance Closed," Miss Marple's gloved fingers uncovered a sealed envelope. The handwriting was familiar now, heavy, controlled, and just slightly shaken with age. Crome opened it carefully. The contents were yellowed, but intact. A letter addressed not to Mrs. Biddlecombe, but to a man named James Cartwright, dated 5 years prior. The first line read, "If you ever dare threaten me or the others again, I'll expose everything that happened in Weymouth." Below, a list of initials, JCEERG, and, crucially, FM. Miss Marple nodded slightly. She kept a record, but never delivered it. Crome glanced at Ellaby. "This yours?" He didn't answer, but Miss Marple saw the flicker, just a flicker, at the mention of the initials. Not his, someone else's, someone who hadn't expected to be listed. They returned upstairs in silence. By tea, the mood in the lodge had changed again. Word had not yet spread, but the wind carried a different tension, the kind that comes before collapse. Miss Marple sat once more in the lounge, knitting untouched in her lap. Colonel Prouder glanced at her uneasily before pretending interest in the crossword. Mrs. Hargrove kept to herself, eyes flicking toward the clock again and again. Felicity sat very still near the window, her shoulders tense. She had not spoken much since the previous night. Reverend Good entered last. His usual sermonizing air was absent. He looked for the first time like a man afraid of being watched. Miss Marple watched them all. Every silence, every nervous hand, every footfall in the wrong direction. It was nearly dusk when she rose. "I think," she said quietly, "we are ready now." No one moved. Inspector Crome stood beside her. "You're sure?" "I've been sure for several days. But people only admit guilt when they believe it has nowhere else to hide." She turned to the group. "The truth is simple, though painful. Mrs. Biddlecombe was murdered, not by violence, but by quiet, deliberate fear. A secret was kept in this house, not a recent one, but an old one that began in Weymouth, a place that seemed forgotten until her letters reminded everyone it was not. A silence followed, absolute and thick. Then, "What secret?" Colonel Prouder barked, but it lacked conviction. Miss Marple turned gently toward Felicity. "Miss Manners, your initials were in that letter." "FM." Felicity froze. "I believe you were very young at the time. A victim of what happened. Not a perpetrator, but someone who could, if pressed, remember things others wanted forgotten. Including Mr. Cartwright. Including," she paused, "including Reverend Good." Gasps broke from the group. Reverend Good paled. "That's absurd," he whispered. "No, Reverend," Miss Marple said softly. "Not absurd. Mrs. Biddlecombe knew. You were a curate then, were you not? And involved in a charitable home for girls. One of those girls was Felicity Manners." Felicity's eyes widened, lips trembling. She remembered, bits and pieces. And then Mrs. Biddlecombe wrote to her, warned her, protected her, until that protection threatened others. Someone knew she'd written a final letter. Someone tried to retrieve and burn it before the wrong name surfaced. Crome turned toward Reverend Good. "We'll need to search your room." The Reverend rose slowly, hands shaking. "She would have destroyed me, for something long past, for something no one remembered. But someone did," Miss Marple said, "and now so do we."